there are a lot of other people out there who have stories to share.
Inspired by her master's thesis at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, on the civil rights movement in Huntsville, Alabama, Kelly Hamlin is the director of the Rocket City Civil Rights Project. Through her research, Kelly realized that many of the accounts of civil rights here in Huntsville are unknown and undocumented in a public forum. With so many untold stories, Kelly knew it would take more than one person to execute such an endeavor. With new team members Peggy Salmon, Bobby Bradley, and Brenda Chun in place, a small grant was soon obtained from the Alabama Humanities Foundation, and the Oral Video History Project began. With the addition of Keith Matthews and his team of filmmakers at AVO Communications, Rocket City Civil Rights can effectively document how Huntsville led the way in Alabama and continues to do so today. The team met at the First Missionary Baptist Church in Huntsville to talk of how On the Record came together, what it takes to produce, and its potential moving forward.
I grew up in Madison and Huntsville and went through the public school system and never heard a word about the civil rights movement in Huntsville and didn't think twice about it when I was younger. Learned about Birmingham and Montgomery and Selma, and these are all very important parts of civil rights history. But it wasn't until I came back to Madison County after college and got to working on my graduate degree at UAH, working on my master's degree in history. And I came across Dr. Sonny Hereford's documentary and his memoir that are really at the time, were the only published information about this era in Huntsville. And watching his documentary, which I had just checked out from the public library, my jaw dropped just watching the history that had happened here in Huntsville. And when I saw that original footage of people walking in downtown Huntsville protesting segregated eating facilities, wearing placards that said, "Khrushchev can eat here, but I can't." When I saw footage of people in line at the movie theater, and these are places I recognize in Huntsville, it really hit me, and I could not believe, I was ashamed that I had never learned this history of my own hometown. And then I came to realize that it wasn't just me, that this is something that so many people have no idea about, even if you were born and raised in Huntsville. But certainly, as we have so many people who move into Huntsville from other areas, this isn't a part of Huntsville's story that they're hearing about.
Kelly and Peggy brought this project, this grant opportunity to me, and talked about how we wanted to capture the history of the civil rights movement using interviews of people who went through that period. So that sparked my interest initially. But then after I became involved and started to, in fact, secondly, I read Kelly's thesis, and that really excited me to see captured in one place a lot of what I experienced and then a lot of what I had read and knew secondhand. I am a native Huntsvillian and actually was a teenager during this time, so I remember a lot about what happened at that time, not as much as some of the people locally who were senior to me, but I was in one of the first groups to integrate one of the local high schools. When I started at Butler High, there were very few blacks in the school. I would guess that there were 50 or less. By the time I graduated, it was a lot more diverse than it was when I started. It's important to capture the history surrounding the civil rights movement and process in Huntsville because it was so unique. And I believe it's important to capture it now because so many of the people who would remember the history are dying. They're getting older and they're either losing their memory or they're dying, and so we want to capture this information before it's lost. In fact, someone said to me recently that when we lose a senior, we lose a library. So we want to make sure that we capture as many of these libraries that hold this information that is going to be so important for us going forward. We want to capture that now and have it for the future.
I moved to Huntsville when I was in my 20s. I grew up in Canada, moved to the States during college, so I didn't know a whole lot about the Southern history. And I studied a good bit about the space history in Huntsville just because it was very interesting and important. And my father-in-law was part of the space team. So during that whole period of time, I just thought so many amazing things happened in Huntsville. And then later, I was inspired by the work that Kelly Hamlin did, and I thought, gosh, at the same period of time that all that was happening was a big social change, social upheaval, and Huntsville seemed to just do it right. I feel very strongly that the clock is ticking on the human side of this history, because a lot of the folks that were on the front lines during that time are now in their 90s. Several have passed away, and this history is so important, and it's just so interesting to get it from a human's perspective. What was it like to be there? Were you part of Blue Jean Sunday? Did you go to the sit-ins? What was it like? It's so different than today with social media and crowds supporting or not supporting you, but back in those days it was much more of a lonely, brave process to go through this. So I think it's critical that we grab this history from the first-hand sources and that we do it now. And I think video is absolutely the way to go, because you see the story coming out in the words and the eyes and the facial expression, and it's not just words on a page. These are things that really happened. And I'm part of Huntsville now. This is my family. I want to know what happened.
I was brought into the project by Bobby Bradley. She was familiar with the project at its inception, and she wanted me to consider the historical aspects of it in Huntsville, especially from the Black community. She was very impressed by the historical timeline for civil rights that Kelly Hamlin had included in the project. And she wanted me to read her thesis, look at the timeline, and see how the William Hooper Council Alumni Association might be involved with some of this history. And I too was extremely impressed, and I thought it would be very important to be able to bring some of the personalities of the William Hooper Council High School experience, which is a historic period and time here in Huntsville, together with the Hamlin Research Project. And so coming on board as manager, I have helped identify persons who might be interviewed and everything that goes along with that.
Anybody who has lived here knows that we're one of the most unique places in the state of Alabama, and so many people know Huntsville for the space program or for our high proportion of advanced degrees and our beautiful landscape and the culture we have here. But Huntsville has not gotten the recognition it deserves for what happened here and how it happened during the civil rights era. This is a huge part of understanding where you're really from, is understanding the city that created this type of civil rights movement. So I've been just so delighted that we've ended up with a team that is so supportive of this quest as well.
I remember hearing my parents talk about how representatives from the Black community and the white community had meetings to discuss how they were going to go through this process successfully and positively. I can remember that discussion. So that was in the back of my mind, but when I heard the two gentlemen that we interviewed talk about it from their experience living it, and how several people were involved, both from the white community and the Black community, to determine what they needed to do in order to make this work. I saw that this was not something that was done happenstance. It was an intentional decision that was made, that we're going to make it different here.
Through you all, we got to establish a climate that will demonstrate to the rest of the country and even the world, if when foreign countries coming here, that Huntsville is changing. It's a friendly place. It just so happened that Redstone was the one to be that agent, which he designated.
A good plan in, hands that are not capable of executing it, it becomes not a good plan. I really have to credit Kelly Hamlin. I think that the work that she has done with a research paper that is built upon the work that Teresa DeShields has done becomes something that informs everyone. The effectiveness of the team allows us to wrap around many advantages, many pluses to the work. What Peggy brings to the effort, what Bobby brings to the effort, what AVO, the quality of the videographer as a storyteller is something that cannot be discounted, because we might be telling a compelling story, but if no one wants to listen and if no one wants to watch, then what was the value of that? This is a good plan.
Early on in this prospect, I contacted the Alabama Humanities Foundation to find out their interest in a project like this. And they said, you know, there's been a lot of history captured in this era, but not from Huntsville. And Huntsville is very interesting to us, and it's really not been captured in a complete way. I think there actually has been a lot of pieces of this history out there, and part of our goal is to bring it together and get it into a concise, meaningful scope that can be used by educators, researchers, historians, and other folks around the world who are trying to impact social change.
Our mission includes the words past, present, and future of this history. It's an old, overused adage to say that we can learn lessons from the past to help us with the present, and that's why history matters. But especially with this material, you come to understand how we can learn from people from the past, right? We're not just learning vocabulary words or dates. You're learning from the experiences of other people.
These stories belong with teachers and with learners. They belong in history classrooms. They belong in community.
High school, college students, even younger students, to visitors of Huntsville.
It's very important to leaders of our community, because the leaders that worked during this period to make this process go very smoothly without a lot of chaos, they intentionally decided that they were going to do something a little bit different.
For people who would never call themselves historians, who might just be somebody who was born and raised in Huntsville and never knew about this history before. I was one of those people. And to have been able to see this turn into something that is far beyond that is much bigger than me, and that is being done in such a polished and professional way, it's just been a delight.
In fiction, there's always an end, a resolve.
In reality, things are always changing, evolving.
There is no end.
And sometimes when humans are not careful,
History repeats itself.
Hopefully, we can help craft all of our collective efforts and thoughts
so that we don't make the same mistakes of the past.
and evolve to an understanding that we're all one race.
One where the color of our skin makes no difference.
And does not define who we are.
By making sure it's on the record.